Hi, welcome back to another video. And today I'll be talking about the 2026 Senate Republican primary in Texas that has become very heated, or maybe be less heated because of the new polls that have dropped that have made a massive impact on the race, and what the results could be looking like in a couple days. Now, within a week or less, we will finally be getting a runoff election between this very heated Republican primary, Senate Republican primary in Texas here between the incumbent, John Cornyn, and the challenger, Ken Paxton. Now, John Cornyn entered this race, and I remember making previous videos on it like almost a year ago now. And at that point, I thought, looking at the polls, I thought John Cornyn was absolutely cooked. I thought he wasn't going to be able to make it for the first runoff. I thought he was going to lose it. I thought Ken Paxton was going to win the first round, have it in the bag. Well, almost a year later, like 9 to 10 months later, and I can admit I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. Not only did John Cornyn survive, but he made it to the next round. And now it looks like, I could say comfortably, now it looks like John Cornyn is officially cooked. I was way too early on saying that John Cornyn was finished with his Senate campaign, but now it really does look like it is over for John Cornyn. Because the other day, Donald Trump weighed in on the race and finally gave his endorsement, where he chose to endorse Ken Paxton over John Cornyn. Now, this is a big deal because John Cornyn is a sitting United States Senator running for re election, trying to win his own primary. And Donald Trump came out and he said, John Cornyn is not loyal, he doesn't represent the MAGA movement, and he needs to be primaried. And so he chose to endorse Ken Paxton. And now Ken Paxton looks like is going to be the nominee, as you can see from these polling numbers. So this goes all the way back to, oh my goodness, August. So as you can see, like Cornyn was leading by 1 point or 3 points, or sorry, no, Cornyn was leading by 1 point, and Paxton won by three, and then Cornyn won by one, Paxton 11, Paxton. Then there'll be a tie, right? And Paxton was leading, and this is kind of why going into it, I was like, Cornyn's not going to win. However, Cornyn did ended up pulling it off. Um, it wasn't enough for him to be able to, where is it here? It wasn't enough for him to be able to avoid a runoff, but he did win the first round. If I can find the numbers, these are the polls. Here we go. As you can see here, John Cornyn won the first round, barely, just by 2 points, actually 1.5 points, but Cornyn barely pulled it off as the incumbent. Wesley Hunt got 293,000 votes and 30% of the vote. Ken Paxton got 878,000 and only 40% of the vote. And John Cornyn got 910,000 and 42% of the vote. Um, Barely, leading Ken Paxton here, but it was enough. And he was able to lead Ken Paxton here and kind of win this first round. But unfortunately for John Cornyn, he was unable to avoid a runoff, and that is exactly what happened. Meanwhile, in the Democratic primary, where are the results here? James Tallarico was able to avoid a runoff by defeating Jasmine Crockett by a solid like 5 to 6 points here. Jasmine Crockett getting a little bit over 1 million votes, and James Talrico getting a little bit over 1.2 million. He getting 52% of the vote, with only Jasmine Crockett getting 46% of the vote, and then Ahmed Hassan barely getting over 1% of the vote. So a very good side on the Democratic primary. And Democratic voters seem to have made up their mind with James Talrico, and chose him as the nominee. However, the same cannot be said on the Republican side, where still, as you can see with those with the primary election results, I gotta scroll down so much here. Republicans clearly they haven't had their mind made up. There was two candidates, and a lot of them went for each of one. And so you saw the both sides were clearly divided here, especially at the time with Donald Trump refusing to weigh in to give an endorsement. However, now that has changed. Now Donald Trump has endorsed Ken Paxton to be the next senator. And as you can see here, we had a lot of back and forth with Cornyn being up by 1 point, or Paxton being up three, and then Cornyn up by one. And now, ever since Donald Trump endorsed Ken Paxton, now we went from Paxton only being up to 3 to now Paxton being up to 11 to points, with Cornyn at 36 and Paxton at 47. And now and then we had Paxton up 12, with Cornyn only being at 40 and Paxton only being at 52. And now it's gotten even worse for John Cornyn, because now Paxton is up by 22 points, with Cornyn only being at 35 and Paxton being at 57. Unlike before, where the Republican primary voters seemed completely undecided on being fully committed to choosing only one candidate to be their nominee, it now looks like that has changed. It now looks like Ken Paxton is running away with this primary race, and come the night when we get the results of the runoff election, I am fully convinced that Ken Paxton is probably going to walk away with it. He will be the nominee. John Cornyn will only have a couple months left um, in the Senate, and then he'll probably retire, and he he is pretty old. So again, that's probably another reason why Republicans aren't exactly eager to back John Cornyn. As we're also seeing with Susan Collins is probably in much more bigger trouble than Ken Paxton is. I don't expect her to win re-election either, but that's another topic for another video. But for now, we are seeing Ken Paxton going to walk away with this primary. And this significant lead in the polls, is only reinforcing, that Ken Paxton is probably going to walk away with this. It's probably going to be a bad night for John Cornyn and his campaign staff or his campaign team. And I am fully convinced that Ken Paxton is going to walk away with this. Now, John Cornyn, there is an argument, especially on the John Cornyn team, that Ken Paxton will be not a good candidate for the for why am I in the map LT projection? That Ken Paxton will not be a strong candidate for the GOP in the Texas Senate race, as we could see in 2020 here. 2020, John Cornyn was able to win his Senate election by 9 points. Now you go back about another 6 years, right? That was back in 2014, where John Cornyn was able to win by 27 points. I know you're saying, "Oh, that was like 12 years ago or whatever," and 2020 was 6 years ago. We're in a completely different election cycle. Which, yes, that is true. However, I mean, at this point, we still really haven't got any like one-to-one head-up polls between Ken Paxton and James Talerico that I'm aware of. But so far, James Talerico has been a very popular candidate within Texas politics right now. He's seen as a rising star for the Democratic Party. He easily won his primary race against Jasmine Crockett. And so Ken Paxton has a lot of political baggage. And when I say a lot of political baggage, I mean like scandals, corruption, allegedly, I might add, allegedly. However, it is soured on in politics, especially on the Republican side. Of course, it's going to be soured on by Democrats, but those are Democrats. The Republicans right now, especially the Republicans in Washington, are very upset. They are very upset that President Donald Trump had endorsed Ken Paxton, who has a lot more political baggage than John Cornyn does. John Cornyn has been a United States Senator for a very long time. He has won several re-election campaigns, and his argument was that he could do it again in this election cycle that is supposed to be a very well performance for the Democrats, and that endorsing Ken Paxton is risking a Senate race that can be very competitive. Now, at this point, I know we're still not fully done with this Republican primary, but at this point, I do not believe that James Talerico is going to be pulling off some sort of Senate upset. I think that if the Democratic nominee is James Talerico and the Republican nominee is Ken Paxton, which is extremely likely at this point. I mean, James Talerico is already the nominee. Ken Paxton is probably going to be the Republican nominee. So if that is the case, if those are the two candidates that will be going up against each other, I think it will be extremely close. I would think it's going to be very close. I think Ken Paxton will massively underperform, but I don't think it will be enough for James Talerico at this time to win the Senate race. I say at this time because That's what I believe right now. It could obviously change. Maybe something happens. Maybe more scandals for Ken Paxton come up, and it gets bad for him. Maybe his polls drop or whatever. But that hasn't happened yet. Until that happens, I genuinely believe that Tallarico is probably not going to pull some upset. I think it'll be close, but I don't think it'll be enough for James Tallarico. But we still have a long way to go until we get to the general election, and I'm going to need more polls to make more of an opinion on that. So, but as of right now, John Cornyn looks absolutely cooked in these Republican primary polls. I fully expect Ken Paxton to pull it off come the night of the runoff election. And yeah, Ken Paxton will probably be the Republican nominee, possibly the next senator, although that's still up for debate, obviously. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. So if I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.